Okay, I think we are going to start our evening. So, good evening on behalf of the William Hannon Library, and welcome to Faculty Pub Night. My name is Rhonda Rosen, and I am the Programming and Exhibitions Librarian. And along with my colleagues in the Outreach and Communications Department, we are delighted to see so many of you here tonight. Tonight is a slightly different program. If you're a regular Faculty Pub Night attendee, you know this is the event where we share some of our most interesting published research by our LMU faculty. Well, tonight there will be no statistics, no graphs, no PowerPoint slides. Tonight is all about one of the oldest arts there is, the art of storytelling. We are delighted to have Mary Kuryla, Clinical Assistant Professor of Screenwriting in the School of Film and Television, here tonight with us to discuss her brand new novel, A Way to Stay. And here is the cover of the book. Beautiful cover. So after her presentation, I will have a short one-on-one conversation with her before opening it up to questions from the audience. If you have a question for our speaker during the presentation, you are welcome to submit it by using the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. All questions will be compiled by our outreach team and submitted to our speaker as time permits. We will be recording this evening's presentation, and it will be available soon on the library's YouTube channel. So please allow me a moment for our land acknowledgement. It is important to note that we welcome our guests onto land that is not ours. We sit tonight on the unceded lands of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples, who in the face of ongoing settler colonialism, continue to claim their place and act as steward of their ancestral lands as they have for the past 8,000 years. These lands reach from the Pacific Ocean, where we stand today, well into what is now San Bernardino County. The whole of the Los Angeles basin is unceded territory. I would ask you all to take a moment and spend some time thinking about what it would mean to take responsibility for one's presence on stolen land. I also encourage you to learn more about the history of the land where you sit by going to native-land.ca. And we have put that link in the chat box. So now let's begin our evening. Mary Kuryla's collection, Freak Weather Stories, won the Grace Paley Prize in Short Fiction and was published by the University of Massachusetts Press in 2017. Her stories have received the Pushcart Prize and the Glimmer Train Very Short Fiction Prize and have appeared most recently in the Paris Review, Conjunctions, Pleiades, Agni, Epic, and elsewhere. Mary has co-authored a series of children's books with Newbery Honor winner and National Book Award finalist Eugene Yelchin, including The Next Door Bear, The Heart of a Snowman, and Ghost Files, The Haunting Truth, all with Harper Children's Books. As a filmmaker, Mary's feature film, Freak Weather, premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival and was in competition at the International Film Festival in Rotterdam. Her award-winning short film, Memory Circus, premiered at Sundance. Several of Professor Kuryla's short stories have been adapted into award-winning films. She is in pre-production on her second feature film, Jory Lee Crosses the Line. In screenwriting, Professor Kuryla has written screen adaptations, including Gordon Lish's Dear Mr. Capote for John Malkovich to direct, as well as screen adaptations for Mr. Mudd Films, United Artists and MGM, among others. Her first feature, Bunny Girl, was optioned by Generation Films. She has written a screen adaptation, A Way to Stay, for the actor John Carroll Lynch to direct. Kuryla was a consulting story editor for the WGN TV 1 hour serials drama Salem. So let's welcome, hi Mary.
Hello.
Let's welcome Mary Kuryla here and let's begin our evening. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you so much, Rhonda, for your lovely introduction. And Thank you to everyone who is here tonight. Unfortunately, I can't see you, so I can feel you, and I'm so grateful that you could come and listen to my book a little bit and maybe ask some questions about novel writing. So, this is my debut novel, A Way to Stay. My other book that I've published is a short story collection. The novel is about a young girl named Olia, who's 12 years old, and she's gone most of her life without living in a house. She and her mom have lived in a kind of an itinerant life. And at the beginning, sort of before the story begins, Olia has an incident in Griffith Park when she was waiting there for her mom to return. And it so frightens her that she refuses to live without a roof anymore and insists that she could please have a house. So this is how the story begins. I'm going to read a couple of different selections from the book, and I'll try to give you a little bit of context. Chapter 1. This may be a good house, but it is single story and wanting. What the house does not want in yard or in fence, it wants in room. Still, it is 3 o'clock in the morning, and what is a knock on the front door when there is so much room for this house in me? Mom says I am the one who wants, the one who stays, so the knocking must come of my flesh. My knuckles float over the wood as a low growl heats up the other side of the door. The porch light flicks on, the house rumbles from someone stomping up. The door swings wide, and before I let go a word, a big dog busts through the screen. It is rude and surprising and sporty. The dog about knocks me flat. Stop the dog! A man in a camouflage jacket barrels out the door after the dog. The dog comes short under the orange nose of the cab. The driver is keeping Mom in his pumpkin until someone pays. Mom palms the passenger window, telling me to stay, while the man in camouflage pivots on the dim street to look both ways for his dog that might have gone either. He calls for his dog. It sounds like brrr. Mom opens the cab door. Hello? She waves to the man, tugging now at the hem of his checkered pajama hooked on his heel. Do you mind, Jack? Somebody must pay a driver. So this Jack, Mom's long lost cousin Jack, the owner of the house, Jack, stares at Mom, considering. But soon he is back to calling for his dog with both hands cupped at his mouth. Even from here on the stoop, in the middle of the night, it is clear as daylight that the reason this Jack is not pulling for his wallet is because he is a lot more interested in what got out of his house than what wants in. Mom has a remedy for this. She is a nurse, and nurses think with their feet. She tosses her high heels on the driveway, then stretches out a leg to loop a heel on her toe, turning to see if Jack looks. Jack's head swings so fast to Mom's leg, his hands cup air, not mouth. He catches himself, and his hands drop. He shoves them into his pockets, so nothing happened. But he has made his choice. Whether he knows it or not, she has won. He has chosen Mom now. She rises up out of the cab, shifting her skimpy hips to tug down her skirt, and Jack shakes his head, and Jack smiles. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he knew all along that he would choose her, but the way he takes a last glance over his shoulder for his runaway dog is going to cost him. If Mom notices, she is not showing. She pokes at the bun pinned high on her head. Jack jogs up the driveway to Mom and wraps long arms around her. She goes up easy, light, and fine. They walk across the lawn, Mom carrying one suitcase and Jack the other, knocking into each other like teenagers. As the cab driver backs out, reckless with his pay, he did not ask what had gone down in the park. The driver never even looked at Mom stepping around the gashed tires, broken window glass sprouting in the tufted grass. He did not ask as Mom hauled suitcases from the trunk of our car and dropped them in his. But as the driver cruised out of the lot in Griffith Park, he looked at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes small and sad, until they got studious. I stopped looking back before his eyes got mean. That is Olya, Mom says to Jack as they come alongside me. Don't you know not to let dogs out? He says. Olya. Jack wheels around and stomps back inside his house. I follow, but Mom swings my suitcase like a gate between the door and me. You're not allowed in. Funny, Mom. She points at the hold up screen hanging open. You heard him. You let out dog. She rolls her eyes and shoots her eyebrows up and down, and in case I'm not getting it, screws her index finger at her temple to say, he's crazy. I start in anyway, but she holds my arm. No, this is not the best way now. It's me. I will do it. I will make so he invites you in, so he begs. Mom sets down her suitcase and feels for the zipper. A sweater appears in her hands. Sit, she says. She tucks the arms of the sweater around my legs. Standing on the threshold, she frowns at the houses across the street. Don't talk to strangers, she says, and backs inside his house. I do not talk to strangers. Talking is not something pretty I do. But I cannot worry about pretty. I'm going to talk my way into a place to stay. I have not had that, something regular to come home to, and I will soon be a teenager, and so will Rome. I should prepare a few remarks, make my case for why Jack should welcome me in, but my feet have already taken me back to his door, and the only thing that comes into my head is how painting blood on the door was never enough to keep out the angel of death. Specifically, the lintel had to be soaked in lamb's blood, or else goodbye firstborn. I do not know where the lintel is on a door, but I am my mother's firstborn, so maybe I'm better off without a house. If there is no door to pass through, there is no sacrifice. Olya is an avid reader of the Bible because she spends a lot of time in motels, and the only book she has access to at that time is the Bible in the drawer. So she's an enthusiast of it. My next selection comes about 100 pages later. At this point, Olya has spent all this time with Jack and his dog in the house while her mother went off to try to pursue her goal of becoming a ballerina in the San Francisco Ballet. It's been very wild and intense there. Jack is completely crazy about his dog that he actually abducted from the police department. And by the time Irina, her mother, returns, she's so mortified by what's gone on that she actually takes her daughter away. So this is a little section of where they go that night when she takes her away from the house. The lights of downtown Los Angeles crowd the stars above the top floor of the garage. Mom parks at the edge of the encampment. It's still here, I say, surprised the police have not rounded up and shoved off all the folks. Mom turns off the engine and takes my hand in hers. It's not for us, Olya, but it's just for one night. Tomorrow we have place in Women's Center. She points through the windscreen at the far side of the encampment. See, there's Darla and her sister. They looked out for us before, remember? They'll be happy to see you. Come on, we can have fun. Darla and her sister hold paper plates above their dogs that circle on hind legs. Olya, Darla says as we walk up, don't you look pretty? Tall, says her sister. Darla makes room for us to set up beside them, but there is no room. Space near the fires goes quick. Darla offers her own crate to sit, but Mom says, we'll come back. I follow Mom along an aisle cramped between tents and some homes of cardboard. Joey waves at us from the fires, then squirts lighter fluid into a yellow barrel clunked with garbage. He throws in a match and the barrel rumbles up flames. Put some meat on you, he says to Ira, his eyes covering all over Mom. No space in the central ring, so we step into the outer, where people sleep loosely, a lot without tents. The old woman still sits at her school desk, writing on a sheet of paper leathered with ink. This far from the fires, the cold comes on. Mom unrolls the tent, and I slide the poles through the orange sleeves. She stakes the asphalt. Mom is quiet, so I am. So much to tell and nothing to say. My time at Jack's house shapes in words born of walls and rooms. How would they sound inside this tent we can hardly see to set up? Mom, tie down the stakes. Look, there's Prince, she says, dropping her side of the tent and walking away towards someone strumming a guitar beyond the barrels. I set down the pole and follow her into the music and the moving shapes, slow and easy, circling the sparks that rise from the office buildings, cooled and blue. I style you! Wood steps out of the dark with her scissors. She pops a long t-shirt over my head and pulls my arms through the sleeves, then snips at the collar, the sleeves, the waist. Wood can scissor up the clothes she rummages better than anything in shop windows. Mom blinks up at the light rain falling. Joey tells us to eat already, hands us each a hot dog stuck on a stick. The hot dog ignites and crisps to black over the fire. You're out of practice, Joey says, and takes my charred one. He eats the hot dog, his lips smacking on the burn. Wood spins me around. She scissors and rips, her head tilting side to side. I go arms akimbo, modeling. Darla and her sister come up and I spin round to face them. The cut doesn't suit her, Wood, Darla says. No? Wood clips fringes at the hem. She squints up at me. You've changed, Olya. Wood spins me around then. And then Darla spins me. Then Mom spins me too. I stretch out my arms and whirl. The guitar strums faster, and the lights of the city fall over our heads. All together, clap, clap, stars. Now I'm going to read one last excerpt that's a little bit more action-y. And this is toward the last third, I suppose, of the book. And in it, Jack and Olya have actually teamed up because Jack lost his dog again and he wants to get it back. The police have it. Jack's car jumps curbs, lurching forward and back. He thrusts his hand out in front of me every time he bangs to a stop. Where are the police with this kind of driving? The answer comes on the next turn. Rows of parked cruisers line the street into a tidy, cramped neighborhood. Cruisers jam fender deep up the driveway of a small stucco home. Some vehicles say canine. Ears and noses behind windscreens track us as Jack slows across the street. Not a bark. In the small stucco home, what Sunset Magazine would call mid-century bungalow, the lights are up red and the music pumps shots, a commotion of cops at the windows. Is this Officer Barbara's house? I say. Shit, Jack says. If there's grace and timing in this world, it ain't with me. She called. She wanted you at her party. Jack raps his knuckles against the wheel. Even better, Barbara's looking for me to show. Slipping in and out should be a snap. Jack squints at the house. Fact is, Bird can't live with anybody. Bird is the name of the dog. Bird can't live with anybody. Not anymore, I mean. Live inside a house. He looks at Barbara's house. Bird will be in the backyard. Reaching over my head to the back seat, Jack sets the rifle on his lap. Operation Rescue. Hooah! Go get him. I shake my head. I got you the goddamn coat. Thank you, I say. That's not what I mean. I got you the coat so you could help me. Happy birthday. That's what you said. I meant it, he says. I don't want you to catch a chill from this. From what? He looks past the house, eyes darting in calculations. Getting Bird back. My head shakes side to side, faster. How can I explain this coat? The first thing I've received that served no purpose other than warm. Now he takes even that away. Wait, I touch his arm. He sits back, scans the street, then looks at me. What now? You can hear the effort to stay patient. Why do you want Bird so much? Why do you want a house? Look, when I took on Bird, it was for always. You don't go halfway into the fire. I feel that fire. Jack's fire thins the air in the car. Jack is talking about commitment, and commitment burns up the oxygen. Bird is for always, a creed that heats up beneath me fast and unknown and alluring. Look, baby, Jack says, cradling the rifle. You take the dog away, you get the dog back. He points the rifle at me. Don't point that at me, I say. I'm going for Bird. Thank you.
Oh, I love hearing the voices of the characters. So exciting. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
It's a very fun book to read. It's a very hard book to read sometimes because some of the characters you want to give your heart to so badly. And that was great. Thank you so much. So I want to let you all know that we're going to have a little conversation first, and then we'll take your questions after. So any questions you have, please feel free to put them into the Q&A. So my first question to you is, what inspired you to write this book?
You know, I think I really was interested in writing a story from a young narrator's point of view. And I was interested too in how she would speak after so many years of deprivation. I mean, she's not been in prison or something, that kind of deprivation, but she's gone without so many of the, kind of the things that we take for granted. A roof over our head, a steady schedule, 2 parents, if we're lucky. She's gone without so many of those regular things. And I wondered I was interested I just wanted to think how that would affect one's way of seeing and one's way of engaging with language. And that's really why.
Mm-hmm. She has such the dialogue for her is so interesting. It's so childlike in a little way, but mostly an adult way. And you understand why, because of the life that she's led. Is very interesting. So you're a professor, you're a wife, you're a mother. I'm always amazed at how people who are not full-time writers can actually find time to write. So can you talk to us about what your writing routine is, when you find time, how you do that?
Well, it's I think during the semester it's a lot more difficult. Fortunately, I work in the short story form, and that allows me to drop in and out because the piece I can see have a sense of the piece from the beginning to end, and I can kind of be working on a short story. I think novels are almost impossible, to be honest. I think I've revised a novel while I was teaching, but I've not really been able to compose one. They're just too lengthy of a sustained focus. So short stories I manage while I'm teaching, and I also will sometimes write a screenplay while I'm teaching because I'm teaching screenwriting, so it's in my mind. Um, so much, I'm fed so much by the students. I get so much out of the students and our sort of shared conversation and workshop and how hard they're working. And I just feel like I receive a lot of energy from that. And I find that I actually have more energy than I think if I were just on my own, scheduling my own. I've been had those years and those months where I just was on my own, and I was productive. But I remember a writer that I worked with, Gordon Lish. He once said, you can do a lot of damage in an hour if you know what you're doing. Or if you know what, if you're ready and you know what you're going to sit down and do. And I sort of have begun to subscribe to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think writing is a very personal work, and some people need to be on a routine. Some people need to be early in the morning where they can have that silence. Some people don't. I mean, it's a really interesting process, I think, for writers, and I think they all do it differently. So excellent, thank you. So it's time to talk about the structure of the book. The main narrative alternates between the past and the present. Can you talk about how you wove that backstory throughout the book?
The past is not that present in the book. There's an incident that occurs in the park, which is probably the main event that is the past. And I basically, it's a rule I teach my students, which is I only referred to it when the story could not go forward without knowing what had happened. It's also in a past event that in many ways kind of changes in terms of how Olya sees it. She, in a sense, sees it more traumatizing when it immediately happens because it propels her into insisting on getting a house or living in a house. But as she develops, and in fact, she encounters the people that terrified her in the car. When she finally encounters them again, she's evolved quite a bit. She's changed, and she's now prepared for that interaction in a way that she wasn't before. So that would be the main past event, and it is just an isolated sort of event that takes place over, I don't know, maybe half hour. Then in terms of the past, about her past life with her mom or the school she went to, and just some little peeks into the life that she led, I try to be as sparing as possible with that. The book is written in the present tense. It has a very strong, it starts in media res. It has a very strong forward motion. It's mostly unified in one place and in a pretty limited period of time. And I really valued that as an experience for the book. And so I didn't want to linger with the past much in any way, shape, or form. And again, I think I only looked at incidences, minor, small incidences from the past to more show how she changed in relation to how she thought about them.
Mm-hmm. And yet in such a short book, there's so much action in this book. There's so much going on with these people, and there's so much change in this book, which is really nice too. So much growth. So you write obviously from a young girl's perspective, and the different weight that you assign to the parent and the child in your book. So how do the different balances affect your narrative? How do you weigh them? How do you give somebody more than the other?
Well, I'm going to say something about quickly, if you don't mind, Rhonda, about that there's a lot of action in the book. And I have to say that, in the literary world, there's probably too much action. That's my screenwriting background. And, actually, many of the novelists I most admire have plenty of action from, I don't know, Flannery O'Connor to Cormac McCarthy, Olga Tokarczuk, these different writers, they actually do have plenty of action, but they also have a great deal more prose. And and the newer work that I'm writing is not so action driven or reliant on entirely on dialogue. But I think that this script was closer to sort of the spirit of the dramatized text. So I just wanted to say that. But I also think that it makes for a faster read if you're engaged in it at all. In terms of the perspectives, so Olya is the narrator, and she is a main player in the story. And in fact, I would say that getting that right bedeviled me, probably, very frankly, more than anything. It was a huge learning curve for me, was trying to understand how to write it as a narrator, as Olya, the narrator. So she has to describe what happens in the scene and also be an actor in the scene. And you really have to sort of balance between just an objective telling, can't be subjective, it has to be somewhat objective rendering of what's happening, while at the same time inserting her view of it, her take of it. She's missing some big box items in terms of what she's missing in the dynamic of these people and her mother and Jack. But she's pretty observant about details.
Mm-hmm.
So she's very sort of contradictory in that way. But I don't use the trope of the younger narrator who truly doesn't particularly know what's going on and makes up things. She
Mm-hmm.
doesn't make up all that much about what she thinks is happening.
Yeah, I felt that she was young in age, but she was not young in terms of maturity. She had experienced a lot.
She has.
Yeah.
And I just can't help but feel like if, that when people have a main text, whether it's, the Bible or another sort of text that's an ur text in a sense, it sort of imbues a kind of depth or weight to the way they see things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And someone who interviewed me asked me if I meant anything about the Bible, if I was trying to say anything. And I just want to be clear that to me, it's just a text like any other text. I shouldn't say that, maybe at LMU, but yeah, it's one of the more interesting texts, but it's not necessarily resonating very heavily in the meaning of this book, except for, of course, when she believes that God is speaking to her from a crack
Right.
in the
And
wall.
it does make sense that for somebody who's lived so much in motels, that would be the text that they have. I mean,
Yes.
it made perfect sense to me.
Great.
So a thread that runs through the novel is about the myths of capitalism and meritocracy, that jobs with living wages are available to all, and that the denial of systemic injustices that lead to social and economic inequities. Can you talk about what you put into this book about this, what that thread was, what that meant to you?
I feel like so much of the, I don't know, the cultural products that we consume, particularly in America, are really concerned with a kind of more bourgeois life, or wealthy people who are wealthy, or people who are at least bourgeois. And I've always been sort of interested in stories about people who are not, have sort of maybe bought into American promise, but have come up short. And I think Jack is completely that. He's a vet from Afghanistan war. He's a cop that can't even stay on the force. The only thing he sort of has is his house, and his house is sort of a wreck. He can't seem to get anybody around him to stay, except, of course, when he meets Olya. And I think that he's kind of a very complex character, and he's behaves badly, and he also redeems himself in many ways. But he must be understood through the lens of, I would say, PTSD, because he was traumatized in Afghanistan, and his dog is too. And they have more and more has been coming out about canines that were warriors, dog warriors who've been traumatized by their duty. And Irina is an example of the immigrant comes to our shores with all the promise of everything that they should be able to have access to. And one of the amusing things about her character is that you think that she probably doesn't have talent as a dancer, but she in fact does. She is a true dancer who was trained well in Russia, and ballet dancers are trained in Russia, are perhaps the best in the world. But she too can't quite get a perch on that, on that dream. It's just a dream in America. It doesn't even matter if you're an artist. You have to keep fighting, and it seems like she's always sacrificing. She sacrifices even her maternity.
Mhm.
She's what many people would say a bad mother. I'm not very interested in bad mothers. To me, I think there's so much put on from our culture, put on women, that if you want to realize yourself and you're financially unable to, there's going to be sacrifices.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's why, in fact, I think that Olia understands. That's her biblical wisdom, is that she understands there are sacrifices. But in the end of the day, she is in many ways the one who's sacrificed, because the craziness of these two people has resulted in her being sort of a satellite to the world, not actually one who's operating in it.
Yeah, it's funny when you said that about her mother sacrificing. It reminded me of the new film, The Lost Daughter.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah, very
yeah.
interesting.
I think we're going to be seeing more of these narratives.
Mhm.
Um, that's kind of a narrative I've worked with for years, but all of a sudden it's becoming more acceptable to sort of have a more realistic conversation.
Yep.
And I think the more we're facing down different forms of marginalization, whether it's racism or misogyny or whatever those things are, the more I'm hoping that we can tell stories of people
Mhm.
that aren't always behaving as we should expect them to.
Yeah. And should we expect people to, I mean, just that's a judgment right there, is to expect things of people. Um, so you did talk about Jack and his PTSD, and so the question is that you deal with that topic about the lack of a safety net for families struggling with for housing, for food insecurity, and then Jack suffers from PTSD and just the lack of mental health and addiction services. It's very strong in this book, and you feel for him so much because he just he doesn't really know where to go and what to do, and so anyways, would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's why he just channels it all on the dog. Somebody once said that, like, the dog is Job on four legs,
Mm,
and the dog becomes this. If he can just train it to stay, right? If he can just train it to stay, to do what he wants it to do, he'll have some control over his life.
right.
And the more he drives toward that, the more he pressures that, the more mad he becomes, the less, of course, he can create any kind of relationship with the dog at all. And that's in a sense where Olya, who so craves a home, comes in and offers this strange, this is something we teach in screenwriting, this triangle. So there's a triangle really between the dog and Olya and Jack. And ultimately, it's quite stressed, and there's a lot of, hitting up against each other and using the other. And the dog really prefers Olya immensely. But it also then becomes something that helps all three of them, in a sense, move on. So that's one of the triangles that's very powerful there. But yeah, I think that Jack is an example of somebody who's not getting the proper care, is not able to, and it's very hard for me to think, well, he just needs to go to the Veterans Association and he'll get all the care he needs. It's very hard to believe that when we see the number of homeless tents all outside the Veterans Administration in Brentwood. I mean, I think the disconnect is there, constant and grinding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And oh yeah, her voice is so calming. It's such a good counterpart to him, because you're right. He gets, more and more, and she's just wants the calm and the security. And it is an interesting, the twosome. Um, so another theme in your book is about parent-child relationships, and you've talked a little bit about motherhood. Um, but there's something about Arena's passing her illusions on to Julia. She's always trying to convince her of, that the motel will be fine, that, the housing will be fine. she basically throws her into Jack and just says it'll be fine. And I felt for him. But let's talk about the mother-child relationship in this book. It's very interesting.
She's an artist, and she's from a country that the book takes place in 2006. So she would have emigrated here. She had Olia when she was here, so she would have emigrated in the 90s.
Right.
Yeah, and not long after the wall came down. And she grew up in a if not, the tail end of the Soviet system. And the country, I know this because I'm married to a Russian emigre. The country, the politics of the Soviet system, its legacy, one of its many legacies was to maybe pretty essentially corrupt the family system and the family dynamic, so that many families were in some ways were turning against each other and did not trust each other. The home, the family, it wasn't a safe place for Irina. She has no warm feelings about it. But she does care about dancing. And dancing is a way out. Dancing is something that she believes in and something that she understands, and like Jack and his dog, that she can control. So she comes to the US, she has the child, and she still can't give up her dream. And I think that it's really interesting because I was noticing with the Olympics, kept hearing about how there were a few older Olympians who were competing. And so she would not be a young ballerina at this point. But I love and admire the fact that she is determined to pursue her goal. And it can make for a selfish person that we're not comfortable with. And yet, curiously, how is it that if a man acts that way, we somehow understand? And I often will write female characters that might be difficult for people to stomach. And I always see it as a kind of, I don't know, like a way of, kind of a litmus test. But I want to say that it was important to me in rendering these people who where the odds are against them, luck is against them, finances are against them, every way you can be pulled under in this country and in this system is sort of washed them out to sea. I wasn't interested in making them in any way victims. I think that they have fight, and they are still trying to do what they can do. It's just the problem is that what they're doing is generally hurting somebody else.
But it's interesting, and I'm going to stop this because we have a lot of questions to go to. But it's also interesting in terms of like mother, like daughter. I mean, her daughter wants a home, and she's going to fight and hold on to that as much as possible. And so that's kind of interesting. I hadn't really thought about it till you just said that.
Actually, and I will say too, Rhonda, that underneath that drive for home for Olya is also, just like her mom, a terror of commitment. Right? So she also, as much as she wants the home, she's also quite used to an uncommitted life.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So those two forces are playing inside of her.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I want to turn this over to our audience now. So we have a question from Jeff Davis. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Jeffrey.
Given what an accomplished short story writer you are, what was the challenge and journey of this beautiful novel?
That's a good question, of course, Jeffrey. I just have to say that Jeffrey knows I really prefer the short form. So the novel that I'm working on now is actually all series of documents, which end up being essentially a bunch of short pieces or short stories. But they're not complete. They all are dependent on each other. I find the novel really tough. And I have to say that I'm kind of coming to understand that the novel as a model of composition is actually most interesting to me when it actually is, and I wouldn't say my novel does this, it doesn't. But maybe the novels that are most interesting to me are the ones that are kind of elbowing up against the what we think of as the kind of continuous one narrator, one protagonist, one point of view. And anything from As They Lay Dying by William Faulkner, which is a series of, it's polyphonic, right? So it has a series of voices that tell a singular event, but we hear it from all the different voices in the novel. To contemporary novels, many books by Olga Tokarczuk are also kind of done in short segments that all add up to this novelistic experience. There's a writer named Ali Smith, who's a British writer, and she's a really astonishing writer. And she will put, say, four novellas, what might feel like four novellas, but they might be unified by all occurring in the same hotel, all triggered by the same incident. So they sort of spin out and around the phenomenon. And I like these novels more in a way, and I think I'm more attracted to that form of novel, which is in many ways indebted to the short story experience. The short story collection is more like, many apartments in a building, right? Mm-hmm. That sort of all illuminated in different ways, but the building holds it. Mm-hmm. The overall structure holds it. And these other novels that I find more interesting. So my novel was not particularly that way. My novel was a straightforward novel. The only compression I could do was in time and place. And so that was, that was hard for me. It was hard for me to hold faith in the story, hard for me to hold faith in the character. And I just basically would say that I'm going to always, from this point on, work from the notions of the short story when I go to a novel. Many people like to write a long story that unfolds and unfolds and unfolds, and many people like to read that. Sitting down with a book that's 600 pages and reading it and everything. I can't, that would put me in my grave, even conceiving of something like that.
Okay, so Patty Meyer's question is, tell us about your adaptation process with the director you mentioned.
Well, that's interesting because, John is an actor, and so he had a very specific idea about what he wanted to see with the characters. And in many ways, he interpreted the book differently than I wrote it. And I will say that I actually found it really difficult. And I can't say that I'm really, I'm not that happy with that adaptation. I think I would probably go back to it and just just take 7 or 8 scenes from the book and make that the movie. I find it very difficult to adapt my own work. Even short stories, I find it difficult because really sometimes I think of adaptation as just fixing what's wrong with the book. But if you've written it, it's a little bit, your ego will protect you from seeing what's wrong with the book. And if your ego doesn't, you might be attacking it in the way that's wrong. So I can't, Patty, I can't say that it's been a, entirely achievement-oriented outcome.
Interesting. Benjamin Van Howe says, you mentioned working with Gordon Lish. Did Lish influence your approach to word choice and editing and rewriting? How do you approach making your language lean and punchy?
Thanks, Ben. Hi, Ben. Ben's a great writer. It's nice to hear from him. Yes, I did work with Gordon Lish, three different occasions. That guy is just, he pretty much makes you toss out everything you knew. And yeah. And I think I worked with him in my late 20s. And it was not such a great tragedy to toss out everything I knew, because I think what I knew was, just was limiting to me. And they were the voices of other people in my head. So Gordon he's very assaultive, he's very intense. He'd never make it today if he were a teacher with his behavior. But the guy's a genius about language and about what language can do. And what Gordon teaches is form. And he says the only thing that we can do, we can never tell anything new. There are no new stories. All we can do is change how it's received, how we tell it. That's the only way we can bring new life to an old form, is in the form or how it's told. And that can be anywhere from the larger structure of the story, like I was talking about a minute ago, to the sentences, to, with Gordon, the phonemes and morphemes, all the way down to the sound. Many of the principles, in fact, that I learned from him and took me a long, long time to absorb, and still practice not that well entirely, I've applied to teaching my students and for screenwriting. And what you might think that they don't really apply, but there are many principles he taught that are sort of unimpeachable.
We have a really interesting question from Carla Marcantonio. More than what the character has gone without, I connected with your multi-layered invocation of stay as more of a human conundrum, to want it versus to be able to do it, to want to command another, oneself, etc. Could you talk more about how this guided your story and characters?
Yeah. Thank you, Carla. Thank God Carla's so smart. She makes me feel like I wrote a smart book. Yeah, I did work with the word stay. That is true. I used it repeatedly, perhaps maybe to the point that it was irritating. But I was interested in the word kind of becoming, changing in your head, like in the person's mind, and not being fixed in this idea of staying in a house. And I am interested in how we as human beings want to stay and we want to go. And that is constantly pulling at us in all our relationships, in our jobs, in our relationship to this country, in our relationship to the world, in our relationship to the planet. I think that, and to each other, and what does it mean to tell other people to stay for us? And what does it mean when we lose somebody permanently? What does it mean to stay? And what does it mean to stay for others? I am interested in this idea of abiding, however, and I do think that it may be one of the great acts we can do for others is to abide, which is a different word than stay. And I think of it as a word that doesn't have any of those plaintive notes of like, oh, or not, maybe plaintive's not, but like that kind of whiny notes of like, oh, will you stay for me, I want to stay, but rather I'm going to be here for you. And yes, I guess in the end of the day, we're always asked to do that, and sometimes we can rise to it and sometimes we can't, including for ourselves.
So Mustafa Yassar says, it's interesting that in your excerpts, Ulia wants to get inside Jack's home as much as the dog Bird wants to get out. Could you go into what Bird represents for her? It's a great question.
Lovely, Mustafa. Thank you for listening so closely. I think that Bird just wants to get away. It's true that in many ways, she's the only domesticating force for Bird. She is the only domesticating force, and her gentleness and kindness toward the dog does calm it down, does show it that it's a possibility that it could trust somebody and it could be a house dog. But mostly it just wants to flee. It just wants flight. And she sort of recognizes that on a most instinctual level, that I think that as much as she wants to stay and as much as she comes to Jack to stay, she also totally and completely is attracted to that flight. And in fact, the main character who challenges just this contradiction in her is the young teenage boy in the book called McFate, who's an entirely repulsive character and written for comedy and like how could you learn anything from this guy? But his big influence is Charles Bukowski, which is his most redeeming quality. And McFate actually has a great deal of wisdom about Olya and that contradiction. In fact, because he has a really incredibly strange family, but he actually is quite abiding toward them, and they are abiding in their relationship with McFate. So in terms of the dog, I think that they are absolute expressions of each other in opposition. She wants to stay, the dog wants to go. But as the book evolves, the dog learns something about staying through her. And she also, in fact, learns something about the agency of going rather than just being taken away.
Mm-hmm. That's a great answer. Thank you. That's really good. Great question. Great answer. Ovidio asks, what is your outline process? Do you follow any story structures like the hero's journey? Getting into the nitty gritty.
Yeah. Well, I don't tend to follow the hero's journey or those kinds of structures in general, even with screenwriting. Though if I found reason to, I would. So I don't want to dismiss it in any way. I tend to write something and then I ask it what it is. I do outline. It's not true that I don't, but I don't. I tend to kind of compose with an idea of what I want to do, and at least begin starting to compose it, and then I will go and perhaps start outlining, especially in revision. Now, when I base it on something, I sometimes will kind of ask, what structures does it remind me of? What other structures, narrative structures, are there out there? For example, the new book I have called The Unawayans is about a woman who is trying to get her husband buried. And I realized that that story is essentially Antigone. And it is also, she's later then called to avenge her husband's death, and she won't do it. So then there's some Hamlet. So I'm interested in these sort of how these narrative structures, they already exist. There's no reason to invent them. But then I might see, pick and choose, how do they apply to my story, and how can I take the tropes from them, not reinvent them, but take tropes from them to help give my own story shape. I don't know if that's an answer.
That is an answer. That was a very good
That's
answer.
an answer.
Yeah. We're going to wrap it up now. It's time, unfortunately, because I could listen to you talk quite a while. I actually could listen to you read, because you read very beautifully, and it brought the book back to me. So thank you very much for that. So I want to thank Professor Mary Kuryla for coming to Faculty Pub Night tonight and for sharing her beautiful book with us. Again, the title of the book is A Way to Stay, which is kind of interesting now that I think about it. It's also a way to stay. Wow, just thought of that. John has put links in the chat for you all, where telling you where you can purchase the book, and that would be including, it is available on Amazon, it's available at Barnes & Noble, it is available in the LMU bookstore, and of course it will be available on our library shelf shortly. The book just came out, so we're still processing it for our catalog. I want to thank, of course, Dean Christine Brancolini, who always continually supports library programming and makes this possible. I'd also like to tell you all that we hope you'll join us next month. Fingers crossed, we may be back in our home in the Vondre Library, or we may be in Zoom. We're not sure yet, but we'll certainly let you know. And our professor of the month will be Professor Ace Bo, who is an assistant professor of information systems and business analytics in the LMU College of Business Administration. Quite a different chat from tonight. He will be discussing his recent publication, Identifying Socially Vulnerable Regions with Persistent Low Accessibility to Emergency Care Through a Spatial Decision Framework. The date for that event will be Tuesday, of course, March 15th, again at 5:30. So we hope you all will join us all. And again, thank you, Mary. Thank you for letting me read your book. And I really appreciate it. It was a really lovely escape from reading academic things. Thank God for the humanities. So everybody have a good evening, have a safe evening. And again, thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for coming.